everybody. Hello. As John Oliver would say, welcome. Welcome to MP Vinyl episode 2. Seems like all of you guys really enjoyed the first episode, so thank you very much, and I'm glad you liked it. Hopefully you learned some new artists or albums that you weren't aware of, and maybe you checked them out. And I guess that's one of the great things about this sort of thing and sharing collections. I'm going to quickly repeat something I repeated in the first episode, just in case you're just watching this one as your first one. There's 8 columns here. These are my new vinyl. These are all reissues that came out in the vinyl resurgence over the last decade or so. Back there are all my 70s and 80s and 60s vinyl. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of them back there with deep stuff. But this is the stuff I rebought over the past 10 years or so. So it's kind of like the cream of the crop favorite albums. So without any further ado, last episode we did the first column, which was A through B. So we only got through 2 letters, mainly because there was so much Beatles in this column. So here we're hitting the second column, which is B through F. Wow, so a lot more ground in the second column. I see a big chunk of similar stuff in the middle, which I guess you could probably figure out what that's going to be. But in any case, let's get into it, okay? So starting here, well, what can I say? One of my top 10, actually one of my top 5 albums of all time. I've always said my top 5 are Sgt. Pepper, The Wall, Tommy, Goodbye Old Brick Road, and this one. This is Ziggy Stardust, or I should say the official title, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. I think this was 72, and check this out. This one is on orange vinyl, the original RCA label. So yeah, this is from start to finish a classic. I've covered a lot of these songs. I did Moon Age Daydream with the Winery Dogs. I did Suffragette City with Metal Allegiance. I did Rock and Roll Suicide with Neil and Randy. Every one of these songs, like perfect album from start to finish. 5 Years is so good. Starman is so good. Lady Stardust. Hang On to Yourself. Classic. This is as good as it gets. Okay, next one. This is a strange one. This is the soundtrack to Nicholas Winding Refn's Bronson. I'm a huge Nicholas Winding Refn fan, and if you're not familiar with him, he did Drive and The Neon Demon and Only God Forgives. This is one of my favorite movies of his, Bronson, which is very much a modern day Clockwork Orange, and the soundtrack was just so haunting I had to pick it up. So every once in a while, if there's a movie I really love, I'll get the soundtrack and I like it on vinyl. Here is a Cheap Trick Live at Budokan reissue. It's the complete concert, so it's more than just what's on the classic Live at Budokan that everybody knows. It's the complete concert, which is really cool. Such a legendary album, legendary concert, and all of their greatest stuff. And of course, the Budokan is just became legendary. Well, it started with the Beatles. Beatles played Budokan in '66, I think, and then of course this made the Budokan famous as well. And then years later, I got to do it with Dream Theater, but we're going to get to that later. Here we go. This is Coldplay's second album and my personal favorite Coldplay album. I love the first album, but for me, the second album was my favorite. And so many great songs on here, but The Scientist, that's my favorite. And actually, the title track, Rush of Blood to the Head, is great too. I remember I was a big 6 Feet Under fan back in the, I guess, early 2000s, and they used the title track in one of the one of the episodes, and I loved it. Anyway, my favorite Coldplay album, I love this one, A Rush of Blood to the Head. This one was one of these. I'm not the biggest Alice Cooper fan, to be honest, but his band these days are incredible with Nita Strauss and Glenn's a great drummer. So yeah, this is really a great representation of where his band is at now. I in all honesty, I didn't buy this. I was sent it from the record company, but it's definitely a cool addition. I love the early Cooper albums, and like the School's Out album and the $1 Billion Babies. All that stuff is classic. And of course, Derek Sherinian was in his band back in the 80s as well. So always got to have some Alice in your collection. All right, this next one is another all-time favorite. Maybe in my top 10. Last week I talked about how Big Elf's Cheat the Gallows was teetering on my number 11 position. I think this might be fighting with it for that number 11 position. What an album. Every song, another one of those albums where every song is so good. My personal favorite is Follow My Way. What an amazing song. Just great chords, great melodies, great key changes. But everything about this album is so great. Chris Cornell at his best, but he was also teamed up with Alan Johannes and Natasha, both from the band 11. So basically he was using 11, using Alan and Natasha as his writing team and production team for this album. And if you don't know this album, I can't recommend it any higher. It's absolute perfection from start to finish. And interesting, this is Morning with the U. I know when he put this out originally, the label made him take out the U, and it was Morning. But this reissue is, the U is back in, and it's Chris's original vision. Okay, this is a weird one. Charlie Benante sent me this. This was, I was a huge SOD fan back when that came out, I think around 85 or so. And I remember at the time, we didn't have the internet, so I remember reading, I guess it had to have been in a fanzine or something like that. There was no internet, no message boards, so I guess I heard about this thing that SOD stemmed from a thing called Crab Society North. And it was this famous demo of like 63 songs. And it was the original, this is the original Crab Society North SOD demo from 1985. And I guess all these years later, they put this out on vinyl, and Charlie was so kind to send me a copy of it for the archives. Honestly, as much as I love SOD, I mean, it's almost unlistenable. It was all recorded on a cassette, super hardcore. The songs are like, a couple seconds each. But for the collection, this is a classic. And keeping in a similar time and place and style, this is an early Crumbsuckers vinyl. Around the same time, SOD came out around 85. Around the same time, the Crumbsuckers were a great New York hardcore band. I ended up becoming really good friends with the guys, and actually out of my friendship with them, Dream Theater got our first record deal. That's a long story, maybe I'll get into that later. But in any case, I was really good friends with Chuck and Gary and Slate. And this is a new vinyl that came out a few years ago, just of some old live recordings in the early years. This is the original lineup with Dave Brady singing and Dave Wynn. So this is like, if you know anything about the New York hardcore scene, and I was a big fan of it back then, the Crumbsuckers, Leeway, Ludachrist, Agnostic Front, all that stuff was amazing in the mid-'80s. In any case, this is a real cool collector's item, and it has the demos, it's got live stuff, so it's really, really cool stuff. Next couple albums is some modern day Purple, with of course my Flying Colors bandmate Steve Morse on guitar. I do have all the original Purple on vinyl in my old original 70s collection, but here in the reissues, just some new stuff that I got from the label. So this is them now live and their last studio album, I believe. And of course, they're such a great band, but with Steve in the band, they're just so musical and amazing. After all these years, they still got it. This is a Dio tribute album, This Is Your Life, and I'm actually on this, but not really. I mean, I am, because the Adrenaline Mob song, The Mob Rules, is on here, but I already had left the band when this came out, but actually still on the inside, it's got a picture of me and Ronnie James Dio and a picture of me there, but because I was no longer in the band, I wasn't illustrated as a cartoon, but there's Russell Allen and Mike Orlando. They still made the back cover. But in any case, this was a great, great tribute album. Not only did it have Adrenaline Mob, but it had Anthrax, Tenacious D, Corey Taylor, Motorhead, Scorpions, Metallica. So yeah, great, great tribute album. All right, here we're about to enter Deland, and you could guess where this is going. This next chunk is all Dream Theater stuff. And any albums that I'm on, I have multiples of each, so I collect all the different versions, colored vinyl, black vinyl. So there's gonna be a lot of doubles and triples here, but obviously I'll just go through each album. I guess I'll give you my thoughts on them all. Mine as well. All right, this is When Dream and Day Unite. This is the original. And when Dream and Day Unite came out in '89, vinyl was still the norm. Vinyl and cassettes were the norm. It was actually exciting for me to have a CD with my music on it, because nobody had done that yet. So the CDs were brand new, but still, When Dream and Day Unite came out on vinyl. And here's an interesting fact. This is the way that the cover was supposed to be, with Dream Theater on one line along the top. Somehow along the way, when they did the CD artwork, I guess it slipped through the cracks, and I didn't notice it, but until it was too late. They put Dream on top and Theater on the bottom. So almost every CD of When Dream and Day Unite has Dream on top, Theater on the bottom, which makes me nuts. It was always intended to be along the top like that. But in any case, this is the original MCA Mechanic Records. Came out March 6th, 1989. So over 30 years now since our debut album. And of course, Charlie Dominici and Kevin Moore were in the band back then. And you know, not my favorite Dream Theater album, but surely so many great memories. You know, it was so exciting to be making our first record. And we went off to Cajun Victory Studios in Pennsylvania, where Queensryche had just done Operation Mindcrime, and we were all huge fans of that album. So it was exciting to be in that same studio that they were just in for Mindcrime. In any case, we made it quick. The whole thing was done in like 3 weeks, including the mix. So it was kind of low budget, but a good learning experience, and still some good moments in some of these songs. Only a Matter of Time, I love, and You'd Say Jam is still great. So there you go. This is where it all began. And then this is where it all took off. And I guess I have 4 different images and words here. This is from back then, from 92. This was German vinyl. This was the only way for me to have this on vinyl back then when it came out, because America was no longer doing vinyl. But when we got to Europe, the German record company had done it. So I grabbed this then, and it was exciting to have it on vinyl. And then these are some of the reissues through the years. I think there's one here, and it's colored vinyl. So yeah, you know, what can I say about Images and Words that you don't already know and haven't heard me say a million times? I mean, it changed our lives. It put us on the map. You know, when this came out, we were already a band for 7 years, struggling and waiting and trying, and just, you know, mistake after mistake, and we just kept stepping up and brushing ourselves off and stuck at it. And all that perseverance finally paid off. And this came out, and when it came out in July of 92. It sat around for a few months doing nothing. It took a few months before anything happened. We didn't even start touring till September, and it wasn't until it started getting radio traction and MTV play around September, October, November. So it was actually many months after it came out before anything happened. And it was our first album with James in the band, and look at us, you know, we were, this was the height of grunge, and somehow we survived. I guess maybe because we were so different from that, it made us stand out, and thank God it did, because here I am still able to talk to you about it after all these years. This was recorded on the Images and Words tour. This is live at the Marquee. This is, once again, the original pressing from, I guess this is from Korea. I guess when we went to Korea, they had it on vinyl, so I was excited to get that. And this has Another Day. If I remember correctly, one version had Another Day and one version had Surrounded. Yep, that's right. So this version had Another Day and this version had Surrounded. So you'd really have to buy both of these to get them all out. I'm not sure what the CDs have at this point. I forgot. It's been so many years. But this is the reissue. Music on Vinyl put out all the Dream Theater catalog the last few years or so. So that's where pretty much all of these reissues are coming from. Then came Awake. We made this record in summer of '94. We went out to LA and we recorded at 101 Studios, where Metallica had just done the Black Album. And we spent a few months there. I was preparing for my wedding. Actually, I should say Marlene was preparing for our wedding while I was in LA making this. And 2 things that jump out thinking about those sessions. One was OJ. The whole OJ thing happened in LA when we were there, and the Bronco chase and everything, same time. And then the other thing, obviously, is Kevin Moore leaving the band. We were in the middle of making this record, and he breaks the news to us a few weeks into the session that he was leaving. So we were so excited on one hand, and we spent all those years waiting and being patient and persevering, and we're finally, you know, we had a gold record with Images and Words. We're finally breaking through, and Kevin leaves the band. So even when we were at the top, we were still having those hardships, and, you know, that's what makes a band strong. But we carried on. We went on tour with this, with Derek Sherinian filling in, and then eventually joining the band. Obviously, none of this stuff was ever played with Kevin Moore live. The only tour we ever did with Kevin was Images and Words, even though he's on 3 albums. That was the only tour, because this tour was Derek. One of the singles that came out from Awake was Lie, and I remember this came out in England. It was a 12-inch single of Lie, and it has the Take the Time demo and Space Divest, and then an edit of Lie on here as well. And it also came with a fanzine, the Images and Words fanzine, which was just starting in England at the time. and that's when the whole fan club scene and fanzine scene was very big. It was right before the internet really broke. So really the fanzines and the fan clubs were the best way to stay in touch with the fans and do special releases and things like that. Then came Falling Into Infinity, and this was a tough time for the band. As you know, we spent a lot of time waiting to make this record. We had originally written double albums worth of material, and the label just kept making us wait, and we wrote a version of Metropolis Part 2, which later became Scenes from a Memory. But eventually we finally got the green light to do this record, but it got chopped from a double to a single, and Kevin Shirley was brought on as a producer and did a lot of chopping to the songs, which was frustrating, but at that point we just wanted to go again. So a couple of years after Awake finally comes Falling Into Infinity, a little bit more of a commercial album. And it was the last time we worked with an outside producer because it was just a tough pill to swallow. But we worked with Storm Thurkeson for the first time, and Storm doesn't work with existing logos or fonts. So some people ask me why Falling Into Infinity is one of the only studio albums without the classic Dream Theater logo. It's because that's the way Storm worked. And the guy did all the Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin album covers, so who am I to argue with him, right? But great stuff on here. This is the only full-length studio album with Derek, and when we did Sons of Apollo, 20 years later, we did Lines in the Sand and Hell's Kitchen and Just Let Me Breathe. Oh, I should mention, we're missing A Change of Seasons here, which came out before this. I don't have it. Dream Theater's put it out, reissued it through the years, and I never got sent a copy. So I still need a copy of A Change of Seasons, a song that I wrote. It was one of the first songs I wrote in the band, and it was an important song for me with the whole Carpe Diem thing and for my mom and everything. So somebody out there, please give me a copy of A Change of Seasons on vinyl. All right, moving on. This is going to take forever. I'm sorry this is so long-winded. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If you're not a Dream Theater fan, you've probably already turned this off. Next up was Once in a Lifetime, and once again, Storm Thurkeson artwork. So once again, the classic Dream Theater logo was not part of this package, but this was recorded on the 98 tour. I think it all came from Paris, maybe some of it from London. It's been so many years now, I lost track. But yeah, live album with Derek and the band. Great set list. I think there's some great stuff on here. You have Scarred, Lines in the Sand, Change of Seasons, Broken Up, Voices. So I think this is a great snapshot of this period in time. And at the time, it was exciting for us to have a double live album because we had only done live at the Marquee. So this was nice to really have a real double album for the first time. Okay, well, as most of you know, if you know your Dream Theater history, that Falling Into Infinity tour in '98 that this live album was recorded on was a tough one, and we almost split. I almost left the band. It was just frustrating, losing creative control. Long story short, you know the story. We eventually made changes. We let Derek go. We brought Jordan into the band. We decided that John and I were going to produce all the albums from now on, and John and I were going to kind of run the band and be the leaders, and not have to answer to the label or managers or things like that. And it was do or die, and we set out to make an album that, if it succeeded, it would keep us on that map. If it failed, it probably would have been the end. I've heard a similar story to Rush with 2112, and it really was a similar situation with us with Scenes from a Memory. It's one of my favorite albums of my career from any band I've been a part of. So proud of this. It was the first time John and I produced. It was the first real concept album that I had ever done, and the first one that Dream Theater had done. And I love concept albums. My favorite albums of all time, The Wall, Misplaced Childhood, Operation Mindcrime, Tommy. I'm a sucker for a concept album. And we really got so creative with this, just like down to, the lyric sheet being in different fonts for different time periods, and written out as if it was a script. And I put a lot of thought and creative ideas into this, and not just me, obviously, everybody. But for me, it was like really a labor of love, and I know it was for all the other guys as well. And I know it's a fan favorite, so I guess it did the trick, and it kept us going for a long time. Even now to this day, Dream Theater was just out, recently doing a 20th anniversary, so I know it's a fan favorite. So I have a few different versions of that. We have colored vinyl. Okay, on to 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Our first true studio double album, and of course every band has to have a double studio album in their career at some point or not. And 6 Degrees was our first, and it's only 6 songs. What happened was, it wasn't supposed to be a double album. We had written the first 5 songs in the album: Glass Prison, Blind Faith, Misunderstood, Great Debate, Disappear. That was about 50 minutes or so, 55 minutes or so. We wanted to have one more long one, so we figured let's write like something like A Change of Seasons, like a 20-minute-ish song. And next thing we knew, we were like 42 minutes into it, and there was no way to get it all in one disc. So inevitably, it became a double disc. And I love this album. It's one of my favorites. I love the experimentation on it. I was going through a heavy Radiohead phase during the making of this album. My OK Computer was like my Bible. And even the artwork, I know I wanted to have something similar to OK Computer. It's definitely got that downward spiral by 9 Inch Nails or OK Computer vibe. These are some handwritten lyrics. Those are John's handwritten lyrics, and just a whole bunch of stuff. But I love the production on this. I mean, I love like a song like Disappear or The Great Debate, Misunderstood. There's just so much ear candy throughout this whole album. And it was also the beginning of my 12-step suite. It was the first album we made after I had gotten sober. So yeah, I wanted to write about the 12 steps. Had the idea. We wrote the music for the Glass Prison. It was right after me and John went and saw Pantera. And I remember wanting to model a song after Mouth for War or Holy Wars by Megadeth, which is kind of like 3 different songs, like going through 3 different phases. So we kind of wrote the Glass Prison with that in mind. And then when it came time for the lyrics and I wanted to write about the 12 steps, I was like, well, this is like 3 sections. Why don't I just write about the first 3 steps only, and then I'll continue with the next couple records. And there it began. And the other thing that began with this was I had this crazy idea of beginning an album where the previous one ended. So this scenes ended with some static, with the record player hitting static, and then 6 Degrees begins with the static. 6 Degrees ends with the final chord of the title track, and then sure enough, that's where Train of Thought begins. And so it was a crazy idea I had of just connecting records, even though there's no lyrical connection to them really, other than the 12-step suites. But anyway, here comes Train of Thought, 2004. We made it in 2003. The tour was in 2004. Another one of my favorites in the catalog, obviously maybe the heaviest album in the catalog, and that was intentional. On the previous tour, on the 6 Degrees tour, we covered Master of Puppets by Metallica and The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden, so we kind of were really in that classic metal headspace when we made this. And the biggest irony is, we made a really proggy album with this. Oh, no, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's the next one. I'll come back to that thought. But in any case, Train of Thought, I love this album. It was just, it's got classics, long songs. In the Name of God, This Dying Soul, Stream of Consciousness, Honor Thy Father. Just a dark, heavy album, As I Am. I mean, it's a great classic album. I love it. And steps 4 and 5 of my 12-step suite was This Dying Soul. And there you have it. Let's move on. The next live album, live at Budokan, mentioned earlier about what a legendary venue when I was talking about Cheap Trick. So for us to finally play the Budokan, we knew we had to film it and release it as a live album. And this is actually a 4 vinyl disc set because it was such a long show. But great set list on this. It really covers this whole era really well. Has instrumentally on here. Actually has Stream of Consciousness and instrumentally, so 2 instrumentals in this show. Anyway, I could go on and on about all this stuff, but this was a great memory, great concert. Then came Octavarium, and this is what I was getting at before. It was funny because on the Train of Thought tour, which was our heaviest album, we went on tour with Yes. And then, so we had this heavy album, but then we went on tour with Yes, so I had to write like more of a proggy set list. Then we put out more of a proggy album, but once this came out, we went on tour with Megadeth. So the tours and the albums completely misaligned. But anyway, Octavarium, it's our 8th album. I had the idea of utilizing an octave for the concept, and it's a concept album in the way that like Dark Side of the Moon is a concept album. It's not a story, but there's a lot of things that are interconnected here. I could go on and on. I could write a whole thesis about this, but if you look, this is an octave right here. This is I guess that was an F sharp. These 8 are the roots or the main notes, and then these are the in betweens. So it's the birds are F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and then B and a C. So that's what that represents. And all of the songs were written in the keys to these songs. So the first song, Root of All Evil, was in the key of F. What was the second song? Then Answer Lies Within was in E, and so on and so forth. By the time we got to the octave, we were back into the key of F with Octavarium. And it was just, there's just so many things and nuggets. I spent a lot of time with Hugh Syme on the artwork to this, putting all different things like the flat, like the key signatures and the time signatures all have to do with, you know, the keys of the songs and what's, this is so much, I can go on forever. And especially in the song Octavarium, which is one of my favorite epic songs of the band. I had a lot of fun with the whole, well, two things. First, there was the full circle lyrics where I connected each lyric to each other and just like a long giant run-on sentence of pop culture references. And then the other was the intervals section where I wrote, basically summed up the previous 7 songs on the album, and then it, anyway. So, and then this is the first album that broke the chain where when this album ended, we didn't connect to the next album. This was, the way this album ended is the way it began, and it's trapped within this Octavarium within itself. So we were able to finally break that connecting album theme. Wow, sorry. Okay, Score. This was one of my favorite shows I ever did with the band. This was on the 20th anniversary tour. It was recorded live at Radio City Music Hall, where I always wanted to play my whole life. And we did it with an orchestra. It was the first time we played with an orchestra. Maybe you don't know it now, but at the time, we didn't announce that we had an orchestra playing with us. So it was a surprise. So the curtain went down for the intermission. Second set begins, the curtain comes up, and there was an orchestra. So for the audience, it was a complete surprise. And then, of course, the second set with the orchestra, we did all of the giant epics. We did 6 Degrees, all 42 minutes of it. We did Octavarium. So great album. We dug out some rare tracks on here, like Another One, which is the very first song we ever wrote at Berkeley. We broke that back out to celebrate the 20th anniversary. Raise the Knife, which was never released from the Falling into Infinity sessions. And the set list after the first 2 songs then goes chronological through our career. So a lot of fun stuff with this show, and really, truly great memories for me. All right, we're down to the final 2 Dream Theater albums with me. Systematic Chaos was our first album for Roadrunner after all these years with Warner and Elektra and Atlantic. Atco was all the same Warner umbrella, but we finally signed to Roadrunner, and I love this album. I think it's underrated. I really do. I think a lot of people don't immediately think of this album, but I think there's such great stuff on here. In the Presence of Enemies is great, and where's the track? There's no track listing on here. It's been so many years, but Constant Motion, of course, Dark Eternal Night, great stuff. I think it's an underrated album. I gotta listen. I haven't heard it in forever. I gotta revisit it one of these days. And then this was my last album in 2009, Black Clouds and Silver Linings. Deeply personal stuff on here. You know, obviously, I finally completed the 12-step suite with the Shattered Fortress, but also I wrote the Best of Times lyrics for my dad, who passed away during the making of this record. So a lot of strange emotions with this album, and I didn't know I was going to be leaving the band at the time. So you know, now in retrospect, it's you know, it's got a lot of sentimentality for me, being, you know, the end of that era. And Wither is kind of like really fitting to that, and the Best of Times is fitting to that. So yeah, but great album. I love Nightmare to Remember. I know a lot of people gave me a hard time over those vocals, but I don't know, when we wrote that riff, it needed so, you know, I still get a lot of heat for that, but whatever, you know, I had a lot of fun writing a lot of lyrics and vocals and melodies for the band through those times, and you know, like them or hate them, it was what it was. It was part of the big picture. So there you go. That's the Dream Theater era here in the collection. I'm going to go quicker because I spent so much time with that. Next up, we're hitting the E's, and we got some Enchant stuff. And speaking of Dream Theater, they were our opening band on the Falling into Infinity tour in Europe. Of course, Ted Leonard is the singer and went on to be in Spock's Beard, and then went on to tour with me in Transatlantic. One of my favorite singers out there. Faith No More. I'm a huge Faith No More fan. I love all their stuff. I have all the CDs and everything. These are the only vinyls I have in the collection, but man, I love Faith No More. Great stuff. Some of my oldest friends in the business, Fate's Warning, of course. Of course, I have all the old stuff on the original vinyl, but this is one of the newer ones. This was, I think, their first album for Inside Out a few years ago, and they're still great. I had the honor of playing drums for them for a few fill-in shows for Bobby Joe Zombek, so Great friends of mine. These next three are, I think, the three masterpieces by the Flaming Lips. To me, these three albums are sonic masterpieces. If you're not a fan of the band, these would be the ones to try. They're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. They're very avant-garde at times, but I think these three, they were really experimenting sonically and just really great production and recording and engineering and mixing on these. So these would be my three favorite. This one in particular, At War with the Mystics. There's a song, Pompeii am Götterdämmerung. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's an obvious tribute to Pink Floyd in their Pompeii era. And it's so Pink Floyd. It's like so well done. I love it. This was the first album that introduced me to Roy Stolt, my transatlantic bandmate. This was the first album I heard when Neil and I were looking to form a prog band. And I heard this album, and this is what sold me. And there's a song on here, Circus Brimstone, which I love. And that was on the Dream Theater house music mix for years and years. And then this is one that came many years later. I think Daniel Gilden, was Daniel in this band? No, but this is with Felix on drums, who's one of my favorite drummers. And obviously Jonas on bass and Roy on guitar. Great band. And we finish the second row with Fishbone, Truth and Soul. This is an 80s classic. Back in the mid-80s, I was a big fan of all different styles. This was more late 80s, actually. It was around 87, 88. And a lot of the kind of hip-hop, funk metal stuff was coming around. The Chili Peppers and Faith No More and Living Color. And anyway, Fishbone were part of that whole scene. It was funky. It was fresh. And you know, it had mixed jazz and hip-hop and funk and rap and metal. And I love this album. I remember I used to play Super Mario Brothers for hours to this album. God, I remember these days. It was the late 80s. I would just do a bong hit, get high, and play video games with this record going like on loop for hours. This is a favorite, an old favorite. I haven't listened to it in so many years. So there you go. This was a very long row because of the Dream Theater stuff. So I hope you found that somewhat entertaining going down memory lane. I shouldn't forget about this. I almost forgot. We're stuck in the middle. This is one more Flaming Lips album, and this was really cool. This was an album they called they put out called Zerika, and I guess it was before surround sound was necessarily a common thing. They actually split up the mixes onto four different vinyls. So you need four different record players, and you drop the needle at the same time, and you put the record players in different parts of the room or whatever. And it was a way of making its own kind of quadraphonic surround sound mix. It's also interesting to just listen to the sub-mixes on their own, but really cool experiment from the Flaming Lips. So there you go. There's episode 2, a long-winded one, but I hope you found it enjoyable and maybe informative. And if there's things in here you don't know, if you don't know Ziggy, you know, if you don't know some of these albums, the Chris Cornell album, you got to go out and listen because there's so much great stuff out there. So thanks for listening, and thanks for listening to me. And now I'm going to go listen to these. So take care, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.